Welcome all, and thank you for joining us today. We will be covering the topic, the SCMH topic 3.2 First Article Inspection and the changes and updates to the 9102. My name is Susan Matson, and I am with the IAQG supporting the Communications Committee. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes to cover. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the SCMH website, and I'll show you where in just a few minutes. Be sure to close any unnecessary applications and windows that will assist with a better viewing experience. Please be sure to use the Q&A tab at the top to ask your questions that you have for panelists at any time. We will do our best to address as many as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being brought to you by the IAQG Product Supply Chain and Improvement Team, which is responsible for the SCMH Supply Chain Management Handbook. Today's presentation will be including a brief overview of the SCMH, highlights to the 9102 Revision C, a Q&A with our panelists, a live Q&A I should say, and then we'll end with another quick look at the SCMH. It is our hope by the end of the hour, you'll be able to understand that the SCMH is a true resource for you, the changes between revision B and C of the 9102 standard. Be aware of the guidance materials that are available to you to support the standard and others as well, and then to hear a great example of the 9102. For those not familiar with the SCMH website, you can either go directly to it by typing scmh.iaqg.org or go to the IAQG main website at iaqg.org and either click at the top where it says SCMH or under the IAQG tools and then click on SCMH. Once on the website and after you agree to your terms of use, click on the SCMH topics and go to the Make module, and then you can scroll down to the section 3.2 First Article Inspection FAI. There you'd be able to click on the header and expand the content area, and this is where you'd find the core guidance materials and toolbox. It's also where you'll find the webinar in about a week or two from here. Now, I'd like to hand over the mic to our panelists. Gentlemen, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Carl Zimmerman, the IDS for the 9102 standard.
Good morning to all. My name is Josh Oderberg. I'm the AAQG Sector Document Liaison for 9102. Again, good morning to all around the world dialing in, joining us today. We appreciate your support on this call. If you did not catch Susan's note as a quick housekeeping item, if you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A question mark button, which should be at the top of your screen. Could be on the side or the bottom, depending on where your controls are. Please use the Q&A. We have some persons that are helping us curate the questions that come in. You might be able to receive an answer back to your question relatively quickly, or later on in the presentation, we will be able to have some Q&A with Carl and myself for any specific topics or any items that seem to be a question of repeat or a particular interest. So please do not use the chat. Please use the Q&A portion on the controls. Again, welcome everybody to the 9102 presentation. The team has been working for several years and very excited to be able to present this to you today. We had a lot of industry feedback. If you are a participant in that feedback, we appreciate your comments. We dispositioned several hundred comments that came in regards to AS9102 Revision B. As well as the OEMs who make up the writing team. We've been working very diligently on this standard for several years, as well as not only live in person before COVID, but we also continued working weekly updating the standard using Zoom and Teams for several years, and we're able to be proud enough to be able to promote the standard and to release Rev C to the industry. Items we'll be covering on the next few slides. The items in blue are changes or clarifications to items that were already in the standard. We may have added some context or further definition. The items in red on the next few slides are changes that will likely affect your current quality management system, FAI procedures or process. We will go through each of those on the next few charts. So in 1.3 in the application, we added an allowance of a certificate of conformance from a special processor as long as the certificate of conformance lists the requirements and the results of the design characteristics that were produced by the processor. There was a provision added to this revision allowing the use of a certificate of conformance for special process in place of a FAIR. A detailed certificate of conformance will have the design characteristic requirements produced by the organization, including the tolerances as well as the results of those characteristics on the certificate of conformance. We added clarification that each item shall have a separate first article. There were instances where suppliers were accounting for characteristics in the assembly and all of the detailed parts in one FAI. We removed the unique single run production order exemption. A unique single run was highly misused and misunderstood in the industry. It created non-conformances to first production run requirements, which is when additional orders were added after the unique single run. Within the terms and definitions, we added a balloon design characteristic definition. The balloon design characteristic is defined as a clear and uniquely identified design characteristic indicated on a balloon document. The unique identifier may be circled or highlighted for easy visual identification. We added the definition of a balloon document, which is an aid used during first article to identify all the design characteristics, including all documents. For example, drawings, purchase order, digital product definition. Typically, there will be sequential numbering of the design characteristics and adding a circle around or highlighting the numbered design characteristics, similarly to what we all commonly refer to as a balloon drawing. We changed the commercial off-the-shelf item definition to include 4 specific requirements which must be met for an item to be considered COTS. Oftentimes, there would be very similar items to an industry item that a company might produce or a company might have in a catalog, but did not meet the definition of COTS. So we further defined the COTS definition by requiring that all 4 requirements must be met. The design characteristic definition was changed to incorporate the drawing requirements definition, and we removed specification from the documents to extract design characteristics from the specs. We removed the drawing requirements definition and change the first article inspection report, which now includes the ballooned characteristics. One of the largest sections that we spent a lot of time on was moving the part requirement from 4.1 to 4.2, as well as further adding definition around first article planning. The planning process for first article was often missed by organizations and not planned appropriately. A lot of times, first articles were an afterthought and done after the part was manufactured and not done during the planning phase, new product introduction. Where this is so critical to the business, and you'll see in a few slides, is creating the cross-functional team to support the planning process. So we added a requirement to have a documented process to plan for first article. And we'll go into further definition about this as well. The nonconformance handling, which was section 4.4, has been moved to 4.5. And the most important part on the forms, which we'll talk about in a minute as well, is on form 1, we changed the complete, not complete, which was driving some confusion in the industry, to a very clear question. If the FAIR has a non-conformance, there's now a yes, no on form 1, field 19. For partial or reaccomplishment of first article, some industry feedback we received was effectively implementing changes on understanding the need for full or partial FAI was lacking. The documented process for change management needs to be done, and by who, to meet the requirements of this section. It's recommended the best way to doing this is through the documented process procedure within the QMS, as mentioned in the planning section as well. Persons able to review changes must be knowledgeable in the product, process, and the environment. Fit, form, or function was causing confusion due to the differing interpretations of who could determine the fit, form, and function of the part. Was it the organization manufacturing the part? Was it the customer? Did that communication happen? So it drove a lot of confusion, and so we removed the fit, form, function out of revision C. Some requirements in Form 1 where sections of the forms were conditionally required have changed. Field 4 for FAIR identifier has been changed from conditionally required to required. The part revision level, there was further clarification added that not all parts have a part revision level. Field 6, the drawing number, clarification was added that there may be more than one drawing, including the parts list. Field 7, clarification was added for the revisions to show corresponding to the drawings listed in Field 6 specifically. Further definition was added and clarification for Field 14 for a full or partial. The reason for a full FAI is now required, which it previously was not required. Only a reason for partial was required. For Field 15, the part number clarification was added to record embedded software. Field 17 on Form 1, the part type changed from a part serial number to part type. The detail part, subassembly software, standard catalog item, or COTS or equivalent would be the part type. For Field 18, the FAIR identifier changed from FAIR form number to identifier to clarify it might not be a number specifically. Also clarified the software and prior approved configuration. For Field 19, as mentioned previously, changed from FAIR complete, not complete, to if there's a documented non-conformance, yes or no. And changing these fields also changed. Field 20 is verified by. We changed from a signature. Now the justification is required for Field 20, and further definition of verified by the person verifying that the complete FAIR, that the FAIR is complete. Which also shifted the dates. So the date, which was in 21, changed from reviewed by, and Field 22 is now the approval field, changed to a required field and from a signature to identification added to clarification that a person is approving the fare. It should not be the same person that verified the field in 20. This is further explained in the handbook, which we will review in just a few moments. Form 2, Field 4 fare identifier changed to requireds, which would be aligned to Field 1. I'm sorry, Form 1. Field 8, supplier was added clarification, added formatted instructions for clarification. Field 9, customer approval verification, added a note for guidance on when the answer is no. Field 12, the acceptance report number, added note for software. And we removed the signature fields on Forms 2 and Form 3. The signature on Form 1, Field 22, is verification that all the requirements of 9102 have been accounted for and accomplished. On Form 3, the same change on Field 4 for fare identifier. Field 5 added clarification for traceability to balloon documents and reports. Field 8 is a requirement, added clarification for units and added wording for embedded software. And again, we removed the signature fields from Form 3. Some highlighted summaries and very important for your quality management system. The minimum requirement is to have a procedure covering the items outlined as discussed earlier in 4.1 and 4.6. Best practice would be that you have a procedure that consumes all of the requirements of 9102 and specific instructions for your organization on how you're going to accomplish these tasks. Organization is responsible for performing a gap analysis between Rev B and Rev C to understand all the requirements and to assure consumption of all the new requirements into your new procedures. You might have received communication from customers discussing transition timing. There is no set requirement posted by the IAQG since 9102 is not a certification. Most OEMs are communicating to the supply chain for compliance date of January 1st, 2024. Several software requirements from software companies have committed to making these changes in Q4 of 2023. The 9102 Rev B FAQs and forms will remain available until early 2024 on the IAQG and Supply Chain Management Handbook sites. Any further communication with regards to previous revisions of B or any elements that have been incorporated into your contracts or purchase orders, please communicate with your customer directly. At this time, I would like to turn this over to Carl Zimmerman to review the guidance material handbook as well as several supporting documents which we have posted online for your available for use. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. For this release of the document, we spent a lot of time on the guidance material also. It is located under the SCMH. One of the items that we put together is a manual for explaining the topics that you have in 9102. When you open the manual, there's a table of contents. As we go through it, we did a flow chart, but one of the key features of this manual is it's set up to the numbering of the standard. So as you go through, if you have a question on the standard, you can skip straight to this manual to see if there's any further communication that we put out or interpretation in this document. So not every section has items in it. We skipped some of the numbers if we didn't have any further guidance or material that we thought needed to be added. We did set this manual up to have sections of intent, best practices, and then common mistakes as you go through it. One of the sections, 4.6, we went ahead and made a flow chart that we put in. We explain the intent of 4.6 as you move through. An introduction. 46A further explains that clause. And then we also went with the common mistakes for your reaccomplishment of first articles. Some people only perform it once. They don't go back and monitor for changes. Partials were not being performed for the changes. Once they had it marked complete, they thought the requirement for FAI was finished and they didn't continue with updating the first articles for the process or engineering changes. And then a best practice is reevaluation at the defined intervals to ensure that the process and requirements are still as documented in the first article. So best practices, you wouldn't necessarily have to incorporate those into your procedure. It's just some of the items that we have seen as members of the writing team that have helped in other organizations. We also continued through the document and even into the forms for the appendix for items that could have used a little further clarification. So Form 1, we provided additional guidance on Field 3, the serial number. Each serial number from the first production run used to complete the fair should be recorded. Some people use more than one part to complete the first article from the first production run. So we were just adding clarification that each of the serial numbers from the parts used to complete the first article should be recorded in that field. And anything that we felt was a question or needed further guidance, we added to the forms. Each first article inspection report should have only a unique identification. It should not be the part number only, but can include the part number. The intent is to maintain traceability to the full and partial. This manual that we created replaces the FAQ, the frequently asked questions that we had. We tried to incorporate all the questions that we could into the rewrite of the standard and put clarification to sections where there was several questions, and we created FAQs. If it could be clarified within the standard, then we took the opportunity during the revision to add clarification to those parts. So we felt we wouldn't need those FAQs any longer. Anything that was over and beyond what we wanted to incorporate into the standard, we incorporated into this manual and put some intent and then also the best practices and common mistakes we have seen throughout the document. As the standard gets more use and more questions come in, if there's questions that we haven't not addressed within this guidance material, then we will get together as a writing team. We will make edits to this manual and the guidance material. If we feel further clarification is needed, several people have questions, we will update this as necessary as those questions come in. So the writing committee is ongoing to control the guidance material. So we will be monitoring it. So it will be the people that had the discussions, as Josh stated previously. Um, we met pretty much weekly for 3 years, going through all the comments that we received from the industry. When we sent it out for coordinating ballot, we had several hundred more comments come back. We spent a lot of time discussing and dispositioning all the comments, so we understand exactly why the wording was put that way, and if there's other content that needs updated, um, we can do that as it comes in. One of the other items that we did for guidance with this standard is we completed example fare packages to demonstrate one of the many ways to achieve compliance to the requirements within the standard. The examples we have are not how it has to be done. It's just one of the ways. Multiple characteristics is an example of something that can be completed several different ways and still be compliant with the standard. We have shown one way as we've completed the forms from the criteria. We show a current example that we have is a detail, including a COTS item, a company standard, a detail part, and assembly. We went through and made the balloon documents and the and fare package, including forms. We're still looking to include more examples. We're trying to find the material that is not proprietary that we can use. We're hoping to have an example created for a circuit board or some kind of electronics component, but we haven't come up with an example to be used yet. Also, uh, we are looking to come up with a model-based definition example that we can use and create a fair package on that. There seems to be a lot of questions over what needs to be completed on a model-based definition, especially on extracting the implicit characteristics uh, that would be used. We have added, we left the Rev B FAQs in there for now, as people are still on revision B, and it will take them a little bit to transition. Then we've added under the toolbox this example FAI scenario with the assembly and the details that are used to build up that example. The When you open up the package, it starts out with a reminder that prior to the FAI, the importance of the planning process. We spent more focus on the planning process this time. It was a suggestion that you should have a planning process in place and documented. It's a requirement that that is documented. A lot of failures we're seeing with the first articles start with the lack of a robust planning process to complete the first article. The next slide is the that we have in there is the part structure information diagram. We have the tie rod assembly, the details that make it up, and what those consist of underneath that structure. And then we marked them standard catalog hardware, even though it's incorporated, a first article is not required. So it's not, we did not create them for the standard catalog hardware. The scenario is the part details. We have the assembly of the tie rod, in which installed end fittings and bushings. The actual tie rod is a solid bar material per an industry specification, the machine body and ends, internal threads and clevises, and then special processes, including heat treat and NDT special processing. We included a bushing that is a company standard part with approved sources. So it's not a COTS item. The end fitting was threaded with a bearing. That was a standard catalog item. And then a locking nut that's a modified standard catalog item. Again, here's the drawing structure with the engineering, and a change order is issued to the machining tie rod. Here is the engineering for the tie rod with the dimensions and the parts list. And then the parts list continued. Then we moved on and defined the additional information that would be needed to complete the first article. As we move through the example, you would need to know the purchase order that was there. So there's that, the FAI ID, and the manufacturing routing number was not contained in the previous information. Then we moved on to the engineering for the tie rod, which would be the drawing, the parts list, a continuation of the parts list. Here's the engineering change notice that would also be incorporated into that part. And here's all the additional information that would be needed to complete the first article that you would have if you were actually completing the part. The purchase order, the FAI ID, the manufacturing process reference number from the work order, each of the materials, where they are from as far as who it was supplied from, and the CFC information that you would have if you actually built the part and procured all the materials needed. Also, outsourcing of heat treat or special processes, penetrant, conversion coating, painting. Then we also put in the gauge that was used to check the threads, because you would also need to know that to record it. The next item is the modified locking nut. So the nut started out as a standard catalog item. Then the nut had holes drilled into it so that lock wire could be used. There's 3 holes you can see that are drilled. So the base material was a standard catalog item nut that has been modified. And so the first article was created for the modifications done to the standard catalog item. Again, here would be the notes that would accompany the engineering for the nut that's modified, and the additional information needed to complete the first article. And then here is the company standard bushing. Again, it has everything incorporated, the dimensions. The notes are actually on the same page as the company, as the drawing for the company standard bushing. And then again, the additional information that would be needed to complete the first article, we've added to the end of it. So that is the engineering requirements package that we put out for our examples. Then as you look, we have the first articles for the tie rod end assembly, the tie rod end detail, the nut detail FAI R, and the bushing detail. So if we open up the tie rod end assembly, we went through and completed the first article with all the information, the part number, part name, the drawing and the parts list, the revision levels of each of those, the manufacturing process reference that we had to have from the additional information, the organizational name and supplier code, um, purchase order document. It is a full, it's an assembly. We listed the components that go into that part, and the FAIR identifiers from the FAIRs that are making up that assembly. Notice that the COTS item does not have a FAIR, so this field was left blank. There are no special processes or materials to list on Form 2, and no functional test procedures or acceptance reports. Form 3 has all of the numeric or design characteristics. These are in variable data, and then we have some in attribute data as we go through the first article. We've also attached the balloon drawing that matches up to Form 3 as to the items. Item 1 is the dimension 18.55, 18.55 plus or minus 0.25. The parts list is also ballooned. The additional continuation of the parts list page, there was nothing to balloon. It's the components that that make it up. Those we did not have design characteristics that were needed for it. This information was used to complete Form 1 for the components that make it up. And that is the first article package for the tie rod assembly. Another example that we have here that we can look at real quick would be the locking nut. There's usually questions on modified catalog items. This is an example of that. Again, we go through Form 1, we fill out a full. This is a detail part, so there's nothing entered in 15 through 18. This one does have materials and special processes to enter in Form 2. The material is the COTS item, the nut that we started with is listed as a material, and the CFC is entered with it as it was received. The special process that was performed was passivation, and it was performed at the supplier on, and this was the order that it was done on. The supplier that it was performed at is the same as the organization that performed it, and the documentation is on the manufacturing order, and therefore it was recorded on Form 2 that way. Because they didn't, since it was performed in-house, they didn't necessarily create a CFC for that special process. The dimensions from the drawing are incorporated in the design characteristics that are recorded on Form 3. And then again, the balloon drawing with the parts list is attached as the minimum requirement for the FAIR package. Under the definition for FAIR, the minimum is Forms 1, 2, and 3, and the balloon documentation that would accompany the fair. Any other supporting documentation is left up to the company to determine what also needs to be added. There may be input from the customer as to additional material supporting documentation that they require as part of the fair package. And with those, we're hoping to not have as many questions and add more examples um, as we gather them, so that there is guidance on how to complete the first articles um, as one way to be compliant. Uh, as stated previously, there are other ways that they could be completed during some of the options that we haven't covered in our example, but would still be compliant to the standard. And with that, we can move into the live Q&A.
All right. Well, my name is Peter Papadopoulos. You'll see I've been trying to answer questions that I thought were pretty simple. I'll be curating the questions, trying to answer more general questions that will apply to everyone. And actually, if you can go to the next slide as well, I just want to remind you that official questions and answers, in case you didn't get an answer today, or if you also have further questions later on, you can always contact SCMH through this website. But as I mentioned for today, I'll be trying to curate the questions. In other words, not maybe answer direct verbiage, but try to generalize to answer questions to a broader audience. The first question that I have on the list for Carl and for Josh, there's questions about when will Rev C be published and when will it go into effect?
Rev C was already published in June for the Americas and European sectors. The Asian Pacific sector is still working on getting through all the reviews for publication. I am not sure when it will be published. I was expecting in the next couple of months it would also be published. Because 9102 is not a certification standard, the IAQG does not put out guidance on when it has to be incorporated. As Josh stated previously, it's going to be reliant on your customers as to when they flow that down, that you have to be in compliance with the new revision. Several OEMs have put the time frame of January 1st of next year for their suppliers to be compliant. And as Josh stated previously, it will also be reliant on if you use a software package to complete your first articles, that the software has been updated to the new requirements of revision C, so that you can transition to the new revision.
Okay, I think that answers that question. Thank you very much, Carl. Next question, again, another general question, is about ballooning, or the theme I see is it required to balloon information from documents referenced on the print?
As Josh went over previously, the definition of design characteristics was changed on revision C. It's changed to the parts list and drawings. Specifications was dropped from the definition of design requirements. So it is no longer a requirement with the new revision of 9102 to go into the specifications listed on the notes or the drawing and extract any of the information contained within the specification. Only what is on the drawing, parts list, purchase order, uh, and that information would be within the definition of design characteristics that would need to be included on Form 3.
All right, awesome. That answers that question. Here's a good question. I will read it almost directly. If your customer only provides you with a model-based definition, does a supplier have the responsibility to create and balloon information needed for the first article?
Yes, the supplier would need to extract the information from the model that's needed for product realization to create the part. That information would have to be extracted to meet the design characteristics requirements on Form 3, and then the requirement as well as the results would have to be entered on Form 3 for that part.
Would they also be required to create a ballooned document? In other words, a representation of that somehow?
Yes, there is a requirement for balloon documentation, so they would have to create a balloon document that showed where those characteristics come from on the engineering.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Oh, there's a question here that talks about change management and the evaluation when there is a change in the new section in the document. Any kind of brief explanation or covering of that, adding more color?
So during the rewrite, some of the discussion that came up was uh, the change management process is one of the major gaps in execution of the first article process. People are usually fairly good at doing the first article the first time through, but keeping up and monitoring changes uh, to the process, especially, is not being done as regularly. A lot of suppliers will pick up if there's an engineering change and will incorporate that. But as far as moving location, changing processes, changing machines, NC programs that will affect the design characteristics, that seemed to be a weak point throughout the industry. So we tried to add a little more guidance and clarification that anytime a change is made, there needs to be some sort of an evaluation on if it has a potential to invalidate the previous characteristics. So if you ran the parts on one machine with a NC program, now you've changed it to a completely different machine with a completely different program. The results that you recorded for your first article for um, the characteristics that were machined affecting that program would be invalidated because they could be different than they are before. So having uh, having that evaluation to ensure that any change is accounted for and those items, design characteristics are reaccomplished, was what we tried to provide clarity and more definition for the change process.
All right, thank you very much for that, Carl. Another question that's been coming up is around service parts and performing FAIs for procuring service parts.
So one of the well, a couple changes that go into providing FAIs for uh, service procured items. If the whole part is service procured, then you would flow down the first article requirements to the supplier, and they would perform the first article for the preferred procured parts. If only a special process or part of the part is procured, whatever the supplier performs, they should provide a first article for that process that is procured. If it's a special process, we have added an allowance of a detailed C of C. The detailed C of C would have all the information on it that a first article would from a special processor. If a special processor were to provide a first article, it would have to have all the requirements listed in the drawing or notes and the results of those requirements on the detailed C of C for it to be acceptable in place of a first article. Since the definition of design characteristics was changed not to to no longer include specifications, the special processor would only need to document as design characteristics on the detailed CFC the items that are located on the drawing or the notes, not everything within the specifications that they would be performing that special process to.
Peter, I believe you're muted.
I was muted. Sorry about that. My dog was barking, so and I forgot to turn it back on. But one of the questions that came up was particularly around field 7 on Form 2, which is the code right after the spec number. And the question is, there's not a lot of information given in the guidance material, or as well as FAQs in the past, or even in the explanation. I don't know if you want to provide that now, or talk about that code, which is an optional field next to spec number.
Uh, we didn't provide a lot of guidance because it is optional. There's different organizations use that for different codes. It was never, we never really described what had to be there. And as we were going through the rewrite and getting feedback on if we needed to use it or clarify what it was, we found out that several organizations use it for different codes that they have. Because it's optional, we didn't really go into it or address it because it's pretty much for the benefit of the organization. If they don't have anything that they want to put in there, or if there's nothing that's flowed down from their customer, they can just leave that field blank. And any code that they do decide to use doesn't affect the compliance of the first article. That's why we really didn't address it or put any more guidance with it.
Okay. Well, thanks. We're about 5 minutes left in the time period, so I'll take it back to you, Susan, for wrapping this up.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we end and conclude, is Carl or Josh, are there any final comments you wanted to say about the webinar and the topic we discussed?
Thanks everyone for joining. There was a huge response to people wanting to participate in this webinar, and we had a lot of people join us today to learn more about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carl. We have come to the end of our hour. I know that there were a number of questions in both the Q&A and the chat. We were able to go through as much as we could, but we will compile anything we didn't talk on or touch on. And those questions will get compiled, as well as a copy of the slide deck that was presented today in a PDF, and the recording will all be available in the section 3.1 of the SCMH. So if you go to scmh.iaqg.org, that will be where you will find it under the Make section, and then go down to section 3.2. For further guidance on SCMH topics and others, as I said just now, please visit scmh.iaqg.org. And don't forget to share your feedback or your comments about this particular webinar or anything else within the SCMH materials provided. Please take the survey or contact directly. That contact button is at the top of every module page. And with that, I thank you all. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning. Take care.